has been done. I've struck a bargain with the Dark One.
Do you know what he's talking about?
I think he ordered pizza.
Oh, good. I'm starving.
Welcome everyone to Roll Havoc. I am your host, Jack Steelman, and with me today are the finest friends that selling my soul to Asmodeus can buy. If you like ghosties, if you like ghoulies, if you like vampires or werewolves or anything horror and fantasy, this is going to be your episode. Today we're talking about Ravenloft. And with me today, I once caught him dropping Melf's acid arrow in the dive bar bathroom in Savannah, Georgia. It's Josh Plotkin.
You know, I told you to keep that door closed. It's not like anybody else said.
I don't listen.
Honestly, though, I have 99 problems, but that spell ain't one.
Being adjacent to him at the start of an encounter grants a +5 insight bonus to knowledge hair metal. True story. Let's welcome Ben Grunzel.
Yeah, I took the metal splaining feat at level 3. So
You put it to good use. I must say, I've learned a lot about Sabbath because of you, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
It explains why I always feel so talked down upon.
But only about metal. Only about metal.
Only about metal.
Yeah.
Very
Everything
specific.
else, Ben's like great. Like it's super
yeah.
nice, polite. Yeah, no, he's a great guy.
Yeah. It's, you mentioned
Outstanding.
Judas Priest. I'm like, which singer? They're both
Judas
great, is the correct
Priest.
answer.
All right, moving on. Thanks.
Judas or Priest.
So Ravenloft. All right. So if you play Dungeons and Dragons and you've played Dungeons and Dragons anytime recently, especially, you're probably going to know about Ravenloft because it is their quintessential horror setting for Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I did a little bit of research and I actually looked it up. I didn't realize that Tracy and Laura Hickman made it. I didn't realize that they created it originally back in AD&D, but from what I understand, the story kind of goes that they were kind of disappointed, or they had a thought that like a vampire shouldn't be just like another monster in a dungeon, and that's how it was presented in AD&D originally. It's like you're gonna just like run it down into a dungeon and like encounter a vampire like right there with oozes and skeletons and stuff.
Mhm.
Like they figured that they wanted to do something that was different. There was like they want a story behind this creature, this character.
Mhm. Well, I mean, makes some sense, right? Like
Yeah.
you got Dracula, you got Nosferatu, like you have
Yeah.
something of immortal, eternal evil. Why
That
would it just be sitting waiting for adventures to cut its head off, right?
and it deserves, a little more pomp than just like sitting in a dungeon collecting dust with the skeletons, right?
Good choice.
So
Yeah, it was groundbreaking at the time.
yeah, it was really cool, and that led to Strahd von Zarovich. So I actually I played Ravenloft a lot actually at home growing up. We played 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons, and we played the Ravenloft campaign setting, used the Domains of Dread book, and my mom actually ran that campaign. That was the campaign that I ran and got like a rogue to level 20 and stuff.
Way to go, Mom.
It was, it's actually a really cool thing. My mom's she was a huge horror fantasy fan. So we kind of like ended up using that as like interspersed with like homebrew stuff. It was pretty cool. It fit really well. So that's where I actually have experience with Ravenloft, where it came from. But what about you guys? What do you guys know about it?
I'm gonna go first because Ben's is gonna be a lot longer than mine.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna give him time to think about that.
Take notes, right?
Most of my experience with Ravenloft is I have been playing the board game that they put out for it, the D&D board game, literally for longer than I have known my wife. So like 10 plus years. And I had heard about the setting and the stuff when I was playing 3.5, but I never touched it. It wasn't actually until I played with Ben and his friends who were visiting him from South Carolina that I played the first time. Now, when I say played, I was only for I'd say about 45 minutes. Then I blacked out drunk, and then I didn't play anymore.
Like you do.
Like
you do.
I do.
Yeah.
Like I do.
The Raven Smash sessions.
The Raven Smash sessions. And then nice. And then, of course, we spent way too long there in our Eberron campaign. It's supposed to be just Halloween, and
we played it for
so
Halloween, and it lasted how long?
it lasted for like 3 months.
Started in October, ended in January. Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like I have intimate knowledge simply because we were sitting in there for so long, and I feel like I understood a lot about what they're trying to do and the differences with it. But honestly, it's like I've only ever been the player. To me, it always was, well, here's eternal evil. You're fighting against eternal evil, which I have always thought about. That's interesting because I'm pretty sure that's what adventurers are supposed to do in this setting. So thanks for like presenting the enemy so succinctly.
The kind of cool thing about that, the reason that they have this, it's evil is eternal here, is because its connection to the ethereal plane. So everything that dies has a chance to end up in Ravenloft anyway. So it's kind of a neat, like, kind of twist on things where it's like, no, that you can, and they also kind of tie that back to the way that the dread lords or the dark lords of these planes and these domains, when they perish, usually there's a set amount of time before they just regenerate and come back. That happens with Strahd von Zarovich. And it's really, it's kind of a cool thing where it's just like, no, you can't really get out of it. And they do a lot of play with the behind the scenes. Is like the Dark Lords aren't really running the show. It's something else behind the scenes. And that's a really neat take that they have on it. But that was the Castle Ravenloft. That was the Castle Ravenloft. Now, that Castle Ravenloft adventure has not changed since second edition, just the rule set.
And I think we have a one shot that we're actually, I think, well, it's supposed to be one shot that we're actively in right now too in Ravenloft, which is very interesting. But yeah, it's very limited to being the player trying to kill Strahd. Yeah, like kill Strahd.
And nobody knows how to kill Strahd better than Ben, I think. It's happened so many times.
Yeah, it's happened a lot of times. I've orchestrated it, I guess. So, I was into vampires and werewolves and creepy stuff before I even knew about D&D. Like as a kid, I used to get books from the library about vampires. So then I get into D&D, get into like medieval fantasy, and then I find out that there's a whole box set. This is during the second edition era with a vampire on the front that's all focused on horror stuff. So it was the first published campaign setting that I really got into for Dungeons and Dragons. So I had that original box set that you're familiar with and played, I didn't get to play a whole lot when second edition was out. I'd like rope friends or family members into playing a little bit, but it wasn't really until third edition that I really got a steady gaming going. And we were playing third edition, and then Sword and Sorcery, which was the D20 label of White Wolf Publishing, put out a licensed Ravenloft product that wasn't official Wizards of the Coast.
And that's kind of cool, right? Like I think I played Dungeons and Dragons in high school when a lot of people were playing Vampire the Masquerade instead. And so I was familiar with like third edition Dungeons and Dragons, it was just like to see that White Wolf was then also like in charge of the horror side of Dungeons and Dragons pretty much.
Right. And I was one of the kids playing vampire and werewolf and the other World of Darkness games and couldn't talk anybody into playing D&D. It wasn't cool in the 90s. And then third edition came out and suddenly it was the hot thing again.
Yeah. The neat thing that I always liked about the second edition artwork for Ravenloft was that it looked like you could take any of it and like slap it on the side of like an arcade cabinet and it's like, oh look, Castlevania.
Yeah.
It was,
Castle, I think Castlevania ripped off, I think it was Castlevania 2 ripped off the Ravenloft, the first edition adventure box art. Yeah.
Did they?
Yeah.
All right. So I have seen the comparisons, but I was just like, oh, that's kind of neat. But I honestly thought it was the other way around. I didn't know if
because the image was from that first edition adventure that the Hickmans wrote. It predates it. So yeah.
Dude. Oh, that's so cool. That's funny. I didn't even realize that. But even in the rest of second edition, you look at that artwork that's like, well, in second edition anyway, like all the artwork inside the books is black and white, but the penciled the pencil style drawings and the
Mm.
ink style, single ink style drawings of just like the skeletons, the ghosts, the characters in it. It was really just, it fit, I feel like the style more than anything else in Dungeons and Dragons at the time. It was really cool.
Yeah, it was very unique. I can't remember. It was either Stephen Fabian or Thomas Baxo were the two interior artists. I can't remember which one of them did the bulk of the drawings, but it's very distinctive. It's used in a lot of the modules that came out with second edition, and I have a few of those. So yeah, Ravenloft has been a favorite.
This
setting for a
guy
while.
remembering the artists that might have drawn on the
I have the
inside.
book next to me for reference.
Okay. It's just like, wow.
And real quick before, because I could go on forever, but specifically the Castle Ravenloft adventure, I love running. I've run definitely more than any other single adventure because it's with the Taroka deck reading and the maze-like nature of the castle, you can really play it over and over again. I've run it in a variety of systems.
High replay value.
Yeah, I've run it in like some like homebrew OSR type mess that I made up. I've run it in Dungeon World. I've run it in second, third, and fifth edition.
I know.
Yeah.
I've run through it. So I've run through it with you twice. I know
Mhm.
we did the Dungeon World run at your place once. I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
because that was when your friends were visiting from.
Yeah.
They're the ones that were visiting from Georgia, right? Or was that the same one that Josh was at? I don't
That's the
remember.
one.
Yeah, it's the
That's
same
the
one.
one where I
Same
blacked
one,
out.
I don't remember
Yeah.
you getting blackout. How drunk
Oh,
was
yeah.
I? Oh wait,
Yeah.
we were both blackout drunk. So
It
same
wasn't a
experience.
great time for me. It's okay if you forget. That's fine by me.
That's fine. But yeah, so we played those in. We played the Castle Ravenloft in Eberron. We played the one in the Dungeon World version. I haven't played a lot of other horror in Dungeons and Dragons or in tabletop RPGs. I haven't really played a whole lot of other horror, but there are some really cool things you can do. You've done outside of Ravenloft as well, as far as horror. What are some like cool horror elements for fantasy that we should like talk about and then jump into like how Ravenloft would be different? I think
It's that, from my understanding, Dungeons and Dragons is all about horror, pretty much most of the time. Everything you encounter is a horror situation. If you presented this in a movie, it would be a horror movie. It'd be a monster movie, but it'd be a horror movie. So even like just a mimic, you could have an entire hour and a half movie about a mimic as a monster.
it's called
Right?
The Thing, actually.
It's called
Yeah.
The Thing. Oh, that's so much worse. Oh my God. But like in legitimate, like the thing that I love to murder as a character, the most aberrations, every single one of those is a horror movie monster of some different type, right? So the idea is that you're always presented with horror in Dungeons and Dragons. What Ravenloft does is somehow make you understand that you're in a horror movie or a horror set.
It's probably, and a lot of that is through tropes. I feel like it's through
yeah.
stereotypes, so you think about the classic horror elements, ghosts, you want ghost stories, you want murder. Like a lot of the elements in Ravenloft are those almost Edgar Allan Poe type horror elements where they're
gothic
talking gothic horror, right? And you're talking about all of these feelings of despair. You're talking about feelings of going mad sometimes because the situation around you is just completely complex and outside of your reasoning. So, and then you have vampires, like stalkers of the night type monsters.
A really good example from the setting itself is the fact that when you're walking across the bridge to Strahd's castle, there's like a line of spirits that you just see, things that had departed when they were trying to get through through the castle. If that was presented to you in a regular dungeon, you'd be fighting ghosts, basically, right? Because that's the difference there. They use stuff there that should just be normal, scary, to be melancholy and make you feel hopeless, right? Which is where I don't want to repeat for some reason the name, but like, I guess it wouldn't make sense not to. H.P. Lovecraft, right, is the idea about building that horror from the things that you just don't understand and see. Yeah. All of Dungeons and Dragons is about your hero dealing with stuff you're not supposed to see and understand. But in Ravenloft, you're presented in the right way that you're up against something that you shouldn't be fighting.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, like you said, like it's easy. You could play up the horror elements of D&D pretty easily. It's just most of the time you're playing it more heroic fantasy where you're striving to overcome things. But I mean, you could describe like some trolls who killed some halflings and make it just horrific. Or even like you said, like undead are a big part of D&D, and like the classic dungeon crawl is like survival horror. Like you're underground, your torches are going out, you don't know what's around the corner, you're just trying to get some loot. Like that's a terrifying scenario.
I mean, yeah, and there's usually undead in those scenarios too. It's like,
Right.
no, you come across like skeletons. These skeletons might have been like the remains of adventurers who are here doing the same thing you're doing. Guess what? They died and now they're trying to kill you. It's
Right.
like that's
And you can play up those elements and make it more horrific, or you can just be like 1d6 skeletons appear, roll initiative. It's
Yeah.
oh no, horror.
Yeah.
Cool.
I didn't come here to be scared like this, Ben.
Yeah, and obviously like HP Lovecraft influences are huge in D&D. Have only gotten, I think, more involved over the years with like kind of diving into aberrations as the designers and designers who love HP Lovecraft, and popularity of that cosmic horror has spread a lot and people have expanded on it.
Yeah. And so Ravenloft, the second edition version, was really neat because every domain you had a different type of horror that was specific to that domain. So you had the classic vampire horror, which was in Barovia. You had the aberrant domain, Dark Lord, who was in Bluet Spur, I think it was called, the Illithid Godbrain. There was an Illithid Godbrain that was a Dark Lord.
An Elderbrain?
An Elderbrain, yeah.
Elderbrain?
Yeah. They called it the Illithid Godbrain. But yeah,
Nice.
so it ended, so that was one. But then you also had like, there were liches that were the lords of domains. There was one where the only inhabitant of this entire domain was a banshee who was looking for her baby, because she was a drow whose baby had been born a Drider. And because of that, her and her child had been like left under the sunlight and burned up under the sunlight, and she cursed the rest of the dark elves for doing that, and for some reason that was evil enough for her to get her own domain to roam around as a banshee. I remember there was one where it was like their entire thing was they just had like a Jack the Ripper murderer in
There's some
style.
domains it's just like it's like a first level guy with a knife is like the Dark Lord. But he's but again, it's the atmosphere. It's like, it doesn't matter if you're super high level, if you can't find the guy and he keeps murdering people, you're going to feel helpless. And a lot of times even these like supposedly low level Dark Lords are kind of helped out by the nature of the domain itself, where like you can't scry on them for some reason, and they just seem to disappear every time you're close to finding them.
Yeah.
I think that was also like, well, obviously a way to make it so different level characters can play at different spots in it, but also it's because like, no, the intent to kill is in fact terrifying. You don't know that because you're presented a game where you're fighting dragons and you're an indestructible fighter. Like, so bringing it back to a point where like there is now we're in a balance. Now things are scary. You thought you were heroic before. This is when we're going to test your mettle to be an actual hero. Rurik was there as an unkillable holy barbarian, and the entire time I wasn't even like trying to play it that way. I was like, I'm legitimately scared that I'm not going to make it out of here alive, and I'm the one that can literally deal with death
out of Castle Ravenloft.
Yeah. I was like, I don't know what I'm up against. My character would be terrified.
And that fear of the unknown, like you said, like Ravenloft really leans into the horror tropes. So fear of the unknown is a huge thing, and that's like one of the biggest things to actually scare D&D players, because a lot of them have like memorized all the classic monsters and know how to fight them, but then you come across something, oh, this one's different, or this is something you've never seen before, or I'm just describing what it looks like and I'm not telling you what its monster species quote unquote is. It's scary.
They do a lot of work in the Ravenloft campaign setting, at least they did in the second edition one, to make it feel like once you get past, like if you encounter a couple of different monsters or a couple of different domains in Ravenloft, you start to get the idea that the Dark Lords aren't the ones in control. They're not the ones that are actually running things. There are these things called the dark powers that are referenced, here and there, that are running the show. And one of their main influences, their main source of influence or way to influence things is the mists of Ravenloft.
Mhm.
These mists are really cool because they're supposed to be these it's this ethereal power that kind of just, think like Silent Hill, like covers everything and you can't see through it. And then by the time you're on the other side, you end up in Ravenloft. And these mists are also supposed to be some source of power. They can become a barrier to where when people walk into them and walk through them, they can't find their way. So it's like kind of the same thing where it's like, if the Dark Lord of a domain doesn't want you to leave, all they have to do is pull up the mists around the borders of their domain and you can't get out. And so it's this really neat device that they use as a setting to say, it's just terrifying mist. It's all it is. And it's just like the way you just describe it is supposed to have like this penetrating cold that you can feel down into your soul, And so it's such a neat amorphous, literally, device that adds to the atmosphere of hopelessness that your characters are supposed to have. It's like, because you're not getting away until you figure out what's going on with this thing. And then to do that, you're going to have to confront it. And then sometimes it's a millennia old vampire, as sometimes it's a construct, a creature. Sometimes a marionette. Oh my God, one of the Dark Lords was a marionette. It was so creepy. I think it was like a puppet. It was like really gross.
Well, there's something that's also, so they have the mists, obviously. You can, it's a way to get your party into the thing, possibly. But it's also a threat, right? If your players know that the thing exists in whatever cosmology that you're playing in, right? How many spells do you know that take your character and put them onto the ethereal plane, right? How many things can take you there, right? So what if, it's a really powerful thing, but what if your characters know that, hey, that Dark Lord that you pissed off, that you got out of, like, he is very happy to take you back. So go ahead, use your spell to cross these problems, but I'm telling you, you're not going to like it once you get there.
So the thing is, those mists can reach out across planes to pull people in. That's actually, there's a Forgotten Realms adventure where some lord of a castle wants you to go chase off these Vistani who have shown up in his realm. And he's like, go chase them off. We don't want them around. We don't like their kind around here, kind of thing. And so when the adventurers go to do whatever they're going to do to like investigate these Vistani, the Vistani lead them into the mists because they want them to take care of Strahd. So it's the really cool thing. But these mists can reach out across planes. And so you now, as an adventurer, having been in Ravenloft once and then like returned home, the next time you're like traveling down the road and it's a little rainy out, and it's like the road ahead is a little foggy. Do you want to continue? The party looks around at each other and goes, I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know if we want to. It's like, that looks a little sketchy. Maybe we just make camp here to get away from the fog a little bit,
Maybe not the version of Eberron, because we beat him so. Well, we were living in his house for 3 months, and then we beat him so hard. Maybe it wouldn't happen for us.
I knew how to get to the bathroom.
Knew
how to get to the bathroom without creaking the stairs. Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah.
Very important. There's a lot of stairs.
A lot of stairs.
Yeah, there was definitely that I think they even had a name for it, the weekend in hell idea of like, if you want to use a Ravenloft adventure, just run a horror adventure, just have them get pulled into Ravenloft and do an adventure and then escape. Although personally I always preferred obviously with Eberron we just wanted to go fight Strahd. And I even presented it to you guys like that. You guys want to play Castle Ravenloft in the middle of this campaign? Sure.
Yes.
But in general, I also really like campaigns that are just set in Ravenloft and like horror focused campaigns, and it's kind of interesting how that's evolved through different editions.
I've never done a campaign that is wholly set in Ravenloft. Like I said, we did a campaign where we did go into Ravenloft a whole lot. And then it was really funny because like we did that, and then like by the time 3rd edition came out and they announced what the event that was, the Cataclysm that like sundered Ravenloft.
The Grand Conjunction.
Yeah.
I ran part of that campaign.
Yeah. So like, it was interesting because like that kind of fit in with the homebrew campaign we had done.
Yeah.
It was great. It was actually very, very cool. We didn't actually play it anymore after that, but having a campaign set in Ravenloft, have you ever done that?
Yeah, when I ran third edition, we just created characters and ran in Ravenloft, and so they were able to go around to different domains, but all the adventures took place in Ravenloft. Like they met Strahd, they were like manipulated by Aslan. They went around, did a few different things. I did some of the Grand Conjunction adventures that where like the idea is Aslan's trying to escape Ravenloft and manipulating events and getting the adventurers to help him willingly or through deception. I ended up not being a big fan of that just because it got so much into like in Ravenloft, if you're focused on the meta stuff of how the dark powers work, how the dark lords work and all that stuff, it takes away from a lot of the personal horror.
Well, at that point, it's like it becomes less of a mystery, right?
Right,
It's like
exactly.
It's like, no, Aslan's like calling this shit out. Like there's another power out there that's like manipulating it and he doesn't like it.
And it's also like the like, why are the adventurers interested in stopping the conjunction? Because like the whole idea is like, well, he's using conjunction to escape Ravenloft. Wouldn't that be cool to like escape Ravenloft? And it's like, no, because it'll like just draw Ravenloft into other realms and corrupt them. And it's like, you mean we just don't want the place we grew up in and live in to corrupt other places? Like, you know, it's just, it's a weird narrative for a
yeah,
campaign.
that is really
I mean, like, I know it'd be horror, but from like a player's perspective, it honestly sounds like putting it to a real situation. It's like, hey guys, do you want to play a campaign in World War II where you're just soldiers in Europe somewhere? Yeah. Like, so everything is awful. Your death is always assumed behind the next corner, and everything, you know, and you have no hope. So go ahead and have your whole setting, your whole campaign of these characters that are some reason motivated without any reason to actually succeed, because other characters make sense. Like, I need to get out of here. I'm going to go back to my life where I have all the things I care about on my nice, my plane that has a sun and plants to actually grow and normal things happen. I'm going to get back to there. That makes sense, right? But just saying I'm from here and I'm happy about it. So I could see an evil campaign.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Ben said,
way.
you know, it's like it doesn't kind of make sense. It doesn't make sense. It really doesn't.
Yeah, I mean,
make sense.
if part of the idea of Ravenloft is like you're supposed to be like defeating evil to save the goodness in Ravenloft, because there is goodness in Ravenloft, there's innocent people and stuff, then just trying to prevent Ravenloft from touching other worlds is like, I don't want to save my hometown. I just want to make sure my hometown doesn't come into contact with other places. You know, it's like, and so it's way too meta for like
for what Ravenloft, like, for the purpose of Ravenloft, right?
Exactly. You're like, we signed up to fight Dracula and the Wolfman, and now we're like dealing with like planar conjunctions and stuff. And I mean, at the same time, sometimes high level games get there.
It's very D&D though. It's very D&D to let's take this story where you think that makes sense and we understand it, and let's just add like 5 different random things, and you have to make it work. Hopefully your character's hit points don't go to 0.
Side note, that's one of the things I like about Eberron is that they're very specific, that it's its own universe, not connected to all the other universes. So you don't have like the universe hopping, like, oh, let's go to Sigil and then back to Eberron. Like, you know, it's
because all the other campaign settings, right? You like Dragonlance, Faerun, Greyhawk, they're all connected. Somehow
they have a cosmology like through the material plane, like most of them are on there somewhere.
Eberron, they've specifically said, is like not connected to any of the other planes, and I think they've come up with some type of explanation by now about how that could have happened. But
they have all the dragon gods, and I like the explanation that was like, so those gods like went from those other things and were like, let's just have a pet project way over here and make it so nobody else can touch it. But the idea that still Ravenloft can means that like, so whatever those evil powers are, they're really, really wanting to do whatever it is they want to do, because they broke the rules of reality that nothing else can, even the gods themselves.
Well, and I took Keith Baker's advice. He's like, if you want to run Ravenloft, make it part of Maybar, the realm of like endless decay and night, because that just fits Eberron. It's like these dark lords trapped in a cycle of horror, you know. So
I always kind of like the idea about Ravenloft being like, since it resides within the ethereal plane, I kind of always like the idea that like the people who live there or who think they live there aren't actually living. Like they're actually like ghosts. Like
they've codified that a little bit in some of the other adventures.
Yeah. So like people who talk about like, oh, like we have our little kid, like we have our kid Timmy, like right around playing the street, like Timmy's dead, dude. Like Timmy's
Yeah.
like I like that when you kind of get to that subtext of everything when playing Ravenloft, it makes everything like so much creepier and so much cooler, I feel like. And it's so you talk about like characters in a campaign setting that you make for this campaign setting. Maybe you don't have that kind of context when you start out, and it's just like, oh, this character is like always lived here, and they have these experiences growing up in Barovia. They have these experiences as like family, friends, and they have whatever their motivation is for adventuring at that point. All of that is bogus because they're ghosts, you know. It's just like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have to say though, that's kind of like really brilliant game design, because if everyone's there is dead already, that means they could be anybody. So you could pull in historically famous people from wherever you're coming from,
mhm.
right? That you know about. Like, I mean, we've been talking about Eberron, so like King Galifar could be there, right? Maybe
Yeah.
he needs your help, and it's like this is the only time your characters are ever going to get a quest from King Galifar,
Yeah.
because he died 2,000 years ago. You know, like, so, and why is he here stuck in the evil negative material? Like it just allows a lot of different type of motivations if you want to manipulate it that way.
We did an adventure where in the normal campaign setting, a character had died, and through the next turn through Ravenloft, we didn't realize it, but we were playing with a character who was like a reincarnation of that character. And then once we caught on, we were like, oh, this is a way to resurrect this character and bring him back to material plane. And so we started like becoming invested in it, and it was really cool.
Cool.
That was really neat.
Cool.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and they've played up like with reincarnation in, I mean, like in the original Castle Ravenloft adventure. And I know like I may have started in the 3rd edition expedition to Castle Ravenloft adventure, where they've kind of explicitly said that like not everybody in Barovia or in the other domains have real souls.
Okay.
Some
Yeah.
of them aren't real people. They just kind of like manifested when the realm did. And you know,
Yeah.
if you're a player character from Ravenloft, you probably have a soul, and that's why you start realizing things aren't adding up around here. Something's off. Does nobody else realize that we never talked to anybody past the city limits?
Yeah. You have a little bit of a WandaVision situation going on,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's definitely kind of like that.
Do you feel it's kind of very Dracula though? It's the idea of like the city you always go through in Transylvania. When the guy's on their way to Dracula's castle, all of those people, they're kind of living half-lives, right? They're
Yeah.
terrified of the world around them. They don't really like, they're what are they, like tuber farmers? Like
Yeah.
there's no sun, like nothing grows. So maybe it was just their way of translating that from what the like, you know, from what this,
Yeah.
where the original idea was. It's like, well, those people are kind of already dead anyways, right? Because if Dracula wanted them dead, he can just come up and meet them.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing stopping them. Like
I don't know. I partly just think that's because you had like a guy who had never left Ireland writing about Eastern Europe and just
Yeah.
projected a lot of
Yeah.
stereotypes on him. But
and that's why I asked that question to you, Ben, because I knew you'd have an actual answer with historical backup.
Ben's got
that I do
Ben's
not
got
have.
the goods.
Yeah.
You want answers. Ben's got the
There's
goods.
a reason why I always go to Ben for monsters. Ben is monster.
there's something to like there's a timelessness to Ravenloft. There's this idea that like, okay, Castle Ravenloft has like killed generations and generations of adventurers, and yet it doesn't look like it's aged that much. It's like it's stuck in a
It's
time loop.
stuck.
When you get there,
Yeah.
it's you know, no matter when you get there, it's always the same year to them, but they've still collected more souls. People have still keep going there and dying, but it's more like it just keeps restarting and the soul count keeps continuing.
Yeah, well, they even mentioned at some point that if you know, as a DM flavor, if you want, you can actually put like the ghostly processions that you see are actually like people who have died going into Ravenloft, Castle Ravenloft, as well, to like whatever their purpose is. So I was actually really excited because of all this. Like we have all this history already in Ravenloft, and then was it I think 2019 or 2020 the Wizards actually released a 5th edition The Curse of Strahd revamped. That was 2019, I think. The Curse of Strahd revamped module. It was just the 5th edition adventure module.
Yeah. Well, the revamped was like the special edition one that came out like a reprint. But yeah, so I can't remember exactly.
I just wanted to point out that
it's a great title.
They did make the pun. Yes, the revamped
Mhm.
module. Yeah.
The first Curse of
choice.
Strahd came out in 2016. It was like one of the first adventures one of the first adventures for 5th edition, and it's still super popular.
Yeah, it's great. I was really excited when they announced the Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Yeah, it was last year in 2021. I was really excited because anyone who's played any of the Castle Ravenloft setting, they'll probably recognize the name Van Richten. It comes up a lot. At the very least, it's in the column notes and stuff like that. But Van Richten is their quintessential Van Helsing scholarly. He's not a monster hunter. He's a scholar, but he's that Van Helsing type character who knows a little too much about what's going on. But then they released the setting as in a 5th edition book, and it was great. I was really happy to see that because I obviously have a lot of sentimental value placed on the setting.
It's funny, like his name is definitely Van Helsing, but what he is like the narrator from Rocky Horror Picture Show. That's what he is.
That's how our Castle Ravenloft game turned out anyway, too. I mean, it was
Rocky Horror Picture Show.
It was Tim Curry on a throne. Yeah.
I don't remember wearing, well, I mean, I guess my character was always scantily clad. When you're that jacked, why do you wear a shirt, right?
Well, we wondered why the barbarian was wearing fishnets all of a sudden.
Yeah. I've definitely had some silly you can't take like the silly D&D moments out of Castle Ravenloft.
No. I always like that meme where it's the what is the Dracula vampire, the silly Dracula movie from the 80s?
Dead and Loving It.
Yeah, Dead and Loving It.
Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah. Oh, he crushed that. Not another enema. That quote will go down forever. Yeah.
But I always like seeing that's what my players are going to turn Castle Ravenloft into, is that movie, right?
It's because it's the classic fantasy tropes that you can do that, because I've mentioned before how D&D does actually have a direct, even printed by Wizards of the Coast, like litmus test of what is really evil and awful versus what is campy evil and awful, right? Just killing all the people at a wedding. That's what Strahd did. Okay, vampire, right? But
it was a crime of passion. It was
the stuff in like Book of Vile Darkness, right, is an entire different level of what evil actually can get to, right? If you want your players to take evil seriously, you need to give them something that shocks them as human beings that's happening in front of them. Dracula's going to be a level in which you're like, oh, okay, I understand what I'm up against. It is serious, but I'm gonna play around because it's still D&D. And then if you actually, I don't even want to mention the actual awful that can't exist. That would shock you. Like eating babies is the best one I could say that doesn't probably jar people.
Yeah, I think that's the difference between what we're referencing, like between scary and horror, right? Mm-hmm. Horror is a genre where it's like, no, it's a mood, it's an atmosphere. It's like, yes, there's a campy, like there's a vampire in the castle, and it's like, yeah, that can be campy. It's like, but then when you sink into the atmosphere, right, you are drawn up to this castle in a carriage that doesn't have a horse. You go and you see this ghostly procession as you go up to the gates. The moon is in a crescent behind it on a hilltop, and it's like you don't think you've actually seen the sun today. It was overcast all day, and then you get up there and you just feel this weariness in your bones. And then the paladin next to you, he looks like first time ever, he just kind of zones out for a second and then shakes his head and says, all right, it's time, we need to go talk to this guy. It's like that sets in. That's the horror. It's like when you get to that setting description, the DM sets the stage, and all of a sudden all of the players are just kind of anxious. They're kind of like waiting to see what happens next. It's like, all right, you go to knock on the door and the door creaks open before you touch it. That is horror. That is what Ravenloft does.
That paladin no longer strides boldly forward. They proceed with caution.
That paladin, they check themselves before they Raven wreck themselves.
Yeah.
And like what Josh was saying with the having a monster versus like actually horrifying the players. And that's a big it's actually been a lot of discussion around the 5th edition book and kind of gaming in general of what is horrifying to the players and how much do you want to include that. And that's where that session 0 and ongoing communication can be really important in a horror game, because you do want to talk about scary stuff, but you also don't want to like actually traumatize people. You can talk about, you know, what's off limits, you know, what kind of stuff do you want to get into. There's a kind of a push in the 5th edition book to, you know, it's okay to focus on what's scary to their character, not necessarily to the player, because it's a role-playing game. Like you
That's
can
a good
play,
point. Yeah.
and the thing is, once you set those boundaries and realize, okay, what's off limits, but what isn't, it really opens you up to really go in. Because otherwise, you know, if you don't talk through this stuff, you're going to be like, well, is this going to be too far? I'll hold back a little bit. Most of the people I know that have, or when I read stuff online from people who have really in-depth horror campaigns, they're the ones that talk about all the stuff and make sure they're not bothering people.
Yeah.
The people who like brag about how, you know, no holds barred my Ravenloft campaign, I'm going to make you suffer, like they're just playing Castle Ravenloft with a vampire. Like they're not doing anything really psychologically horrifying, because they're not really interested in having those deeper conversations. So, you know, it's an ongoing thing with D&D as the hobby grows. They're trying to, you want players to be comfortable in the game they're playing. And again,
you're still here to have fun, right?
Right.
You're still here. You're not here to be traumatized. You're not here to be grossed out. Even you're not really here. You're here to have an experience with your friends that is fun. And
well, it's like going to see a horror movie or going to a ride in an amusement park. You want to be scared under the parameters you're okay with, you know.
Yeah. It's like you don't go to a horror movie for someone to jump out at you in the aisle.
In real life. And if it's
you go to Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios,
in which case you know what you're getting into.
And if you have like some type of like panic, you know, issue, like an issue with people jumping out at you, you don't do that. But maybe you like, you know, the slow burn thriller movies that, you know, would creep other people out. I mean, I love ghost movie. I mean, I think I've talked about two of my favorite movies are Midsummer and Hereditary, that really creep me out. They were amazing movies. I don't think I ever want to watch either one of them a second time.
Yeah.
They put me through a lot just watching them once.
But you loved the experience, right? It was good.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think, Ben, you do a great job as a DM with horror elements. You remember those spiders that were made out of hand?
Jesus. From that one shot. Oh my God. Yeah.
I want to talk more.
Why did you have to bring that up?
Because
you didn't have the session 0 before we recorded this, asking, is it okay if I talk about
Josh, is it okay for us to discuss this? We can move on.
I might have to leave if you guys want to.
Josh has to go before.
It is truly disturbing.
I like coming up with visuals that creep people out.
What were some other things? You came up with a lot of good stuff in that one. What were some other things you had? Do you remember?
In that one, and this was a Shadow of the Demon Lord, which is kind of a dark fantasy horror themed game. Well, we played a few sessions of that. That was also the one with the Beowulf themed adventure with like a troll thing on an island.
Yes.
And that was pretty, just because the first time you guys saw it, it tore apart the higher level character, the guy that all followers of, it just tore him apart. And you guys had to run for cover after that.
Very Grendel. Yeah. It was good.
Yeah, and a lot of that was just like the creepiness of, there's something here that wants to kill us. We need to figure out more information about it
before we can get out of here. And we come back to that element, right? Josh, have you ever do you have any good like horrors? Have you ever played any good horror campaigns or any good horror sessions? Because I've got a couple I could talk about.
I've played more Eberron than anything else, and Eberron has everything in it. I would say this explains a lot about my like love of killing aberrations, because the DM was so good at understanding what an alien mind is supposed to be, right? That I was playing someone that was up against a Delker Lord, which they're lords of the, I forget what they call it in the regular like Faerun stuff like that, but it's basically the endless, the far realm basically. And these guys tried to invade Eberron, take it over, make it into the far realm. You know, they touch flesh, they change it into something else. They can do that type of thing. And I just remember one time where I'm fighting these aberrations and the Delker shows up, and I realized the whole thing was just like a plan for this thing to be able to talk to me. And it was just like, did you like killing them? I made them for you. So it felt like I was talking to like a serial killer.
Creeped out
I remember like that the character itself creeped out me. as well. Good job, DM. Really creeped out. And honestly, it really did help the character development of it. The true terror I felt in that moment is the fact like, oh, I actually should be dead right now. It's because of this insane thing's mind, whatever their machinations are, that I'm still standing here and feeling that level of powerlessness on top of the fact that like I've seen a lot of movies with serial killers and I know exactly what the hell you're going for.
I know where this goes next. I know what happens next.
I was like, you're gonna peel all my skin off, aren't you? It's like, and it's like, if I could, I would, but I have to go make more of those. Yeah, that was one of the most scary things I think I've ever dealt with. Yeah. And that's why aberrations still sit in my mind as the scariest things, because you could see them as just a monster, but what you need to understand is that they're an alien. Taking control of you and your brain is as much as breathing is to you. And that's
they just do it, right?
It's not something you're used to dealing with.
Yeah.
And that's why I like as a player too, because it's like I don't actually even know how to get in the mind of that thing. You know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We did one of the Jack the Ripper Ravenloft campaign adventures. The whole premise of it was that you were solving a murder mystery. Didn't matter what level you were, really. You were solving a murder mystery against a ghostly killer that you couldn't necessarily catch. Because of that, the adventure module was set out in time lapses. And you had, I can't remember the set number of hours, but you had a set number of hours. Let's say it was like 12 to finish this adventure. And every hour, a bell would toll in the city. You would hear it, and that would mean that somebody just died. And so the way that the DM has to pace the adventure is that if the adventurers get a couple of clues, but then they start to kind of like tarry a little bit, you hit a clock, and then all of a sudden the players know it's all right, another hour has passed, someone else has died. That might be a clue, you might not even hear about it, but you just know for a fact that like you have until midnight to figure out who this person is. And it's really good job. It is that gothic horror, Edgar Allan Poe type of storytelling where there's so much implied in just the atmosphere. It was really cool. It sets a lot of tension, and it does create that kind of horror type element where you're just waiting for something bloody to happen at around every corner. It was really neat. That one was really good.
Yeah, and it kind of subverts the normal kind of heroic fantasy of we're going to go kill these monsters and avenge somebody or stop them from killing somebody, and to just be like trying to solve a mystery and knowing that the more you're failing, the longer you're taking, that it's costing lives. Like that's creepy. You know, it adds a personal touch to it that you don't
scary
get in most D&D adventures.
It's legitimately scary. But I feel like that was second edition, which was a whole other play style than like I feel like you get to third edition, adventures like that don't really come out anymore. Third edition 3.5, it's like, nope, we give you all these attack bonuses, you're just gonna go in and swing at stuff.
The DM has to get creative, right? Has to that's probably where like we've talked so much about how a player that loves, here's the mechanics, here's how they work, let me make the machine that does something. So at the same time, I've also talked about how I also am like, the DM is in charge though. So when I've done all this work to make this machine and the DM is just like, doesn't do anything at all.
It has your attention, right?
You're like, what? Because I'm not just scared for my character and the death that might happen to them, because I don't want to have to make another one. It's like, I'm scared of the unknown myself. You know, maybe it's not terror, right? But I am kind of like scared. I was like, well, I've invested a lot of time and effort in this thing, and now I don't know what to do. Every other situation I know what to do, and now I don't. Just not knowing is scary.
Ravenloft itself does some really cool stuff when it comes to interacting with the mechanics of regular Dungeons and Dragons as well. There's a few things that they do specifically. I think whenever, at least it was in second and probably third edition, divine spellcasters have some serious problems when it comes to showing up in Ravenloft. Any Dark Lord at any point in time can pinpoint exactly where any good aligned good aligned divine caster is, because they just don't occur naturally in Ravenloft. Don't. So whenever they show up in Ravenloft, the Dark Lords are always like, yep, we know exactly where you are at all times. And it kind of works in that same way we were talking about earlier, where it's like sometimes you can't track them. It's like, yeah, but they can track you. They know if you have a paladin in your party, that nice blanket of security that a paladin brings you, they're just always there to lay on hands. They're always there to like give you auras of protection. Doesn't matter.
It's now a target.
It is a target. And it's a target for something that is essentially immortal, or whatever parameters the DM wants to make them, that throw them at you. I know, Ben, you probably remember powers checks and madness checks.
Yeah, in second edition you had powers checks. If you committed an evil act, it had like a small percentile chance of the dark powers noticing you, and every time they noticed you, you would get one benefit and then one drawback, one like minor curse. So you might like get like claws that let you do claw damage, but you have like these, on the flip side is they're like these huge black twisted claws you have to keep hidden, because otherwise people are going to be like, what the hell is wrong with you?
Look at that monster. Yeah.
Right. And then they would get the benefits and the drawbacks both get progressively worse. And like after enough, you would like basically become a dark lord through your evil actions. And that was kind of fun,
Cool.
it coming up in play, because people would do stuff and can't be a big deal in a normal D&D game. It's amazing, especially I feel like when I was younger, like torturing people for information was like really common. Like, oh, I'll just start cutting him until he tells me what I want. And it's like,
that's evil.
That's a powers check. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Like you're torturing somebody who's helpless.
There was
that's evil.
Another system, I think, that might have actually, I guess now that you mentioned that, they might have made it because of that idea, is that was the taint system.
Yeah, that was in third edition, like the Heroes of Horror.
Yeah, where you got like points, and then it would twist you physically if the more points you got.
That's cool. I never saw that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you could also get points from like just being exposed to like corruption and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
it wasn't just doing evil. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you slept in a haunted tomb, you might get corruption points and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And then like and then you had like fear and horror checks, which are kind of basically you just might have to make a fear save just for seeing something scary. And horror was for more like existential stuff. Like fear is a monster running at you, like a werewolf rips somebody limb from limb and is charging at you. Make a fear check, or you just panic and run away. A horror check is you're watching you're keeping an eye on your friend, and they don't know you're watching, and they run off and peel their skin off and turn into a wolf and run off into the woods, and you're like, whoa, and you might freak out.
Yeah.
It's kind of like shadow points from the Middle Earth campaign.
There are some parallels, right? I was thinking about that.
Yeah. And they've kind of modified both in the 5th edition version. You can get these dark gifts, which are kind of like an extra like little template or background thing as an option for some dark secret in your past, or it can come up in play, which are kind of like their version of the powers checks, but it's much more like the player and the DM should work together on this, make sure it makes sense for the story instead of just being an arbitrary mechanic. And they've tried playing around like stress points. I've never played it, so I can't speak too much to it. I do know that I'm always interested in seeing different mechanics for fear, or what's often borrowed from Call of Cthulhu, like the insanity points, like that whole idea of making a check, because a lot of people have kind of looked at it now, and it's like a lot of those rules are really built on like 1970s psychology that aren't even appropriate to the genre. Like there's no reason that you would like suddenly develop like a random mental disorder from seeing something scary. That's not even how it works in HP Lovecraft stories. It's more like mental breakdowns.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to how like exploring different options in horror games for expressing that, like some type of just stress constantly building. But how to do that mechanically is difficult, especially in D&D where you don't want to take agency away from people.
And also it sounds like all these things are always like a negative impact. It goes one direction. You're either at zero or you're going into that darkness. And I always like it. It's like, well, if you're going to provide that, you need to provide the opposite as well. You need to be able to, so people can incentivize to do the good and just thing and get like, just points instead of, and maybe that like counteracts what they like, the taint or the evilness affects them, stuff like that. That's how I always see like that are fair. But the thing is that when you're dealing with horror, maybe you're not supposed to be fair. Maybe it's supposed to be unfair.
Yeah, and that's a game design thing too. Like if you only have negative side effects, players aren't going to like that. So having a balance with positive things that can happen too, if you're going to have mechanics for it,
put it in there, right?
So the mechanics around horror, because really, how much of horror do you want to be mechanical, and how much do you want to be purely role playing? And that's depends. It varies from person to person, from group to group, and I'm like I said, I'm kind of curious to try out different things. If I was to run a Ravenloft campaign now, I wouldn't run it the same way I did 20 years ago when third edition came out.
The kind of cool thing is that you could. It's been out since like 88.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been around for so fucking long. You fucking
Almost
could.
as old as I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I gotta ask you guys, Ben, Wolfman versus Dracula, who wins?
Oh,
I know.
That's always a thing, right? Because usually in any given depiction of werewolves and vampires, one is more powerful than the other.
According to White Wolf, at least.
Yeah.
They'll tell you.
I mean, if it's Dracula and Wolfman, Dracula wins because he's older and
He's
more
Dracula.
powerful. New werewolf versus new vampire, werewolf.
Josh, same question. What do you think? Dracula
Oh my
versus
god,
Wolfman.
it's so detailed. All I can think is an awful Van Helsing movie with Hugh Jackman in it. How it's like,
Hugh was great.
He's okay. Yeah, obviously. I'm just talking about the rest of the movie around it. No one questions Hugh Jackman's ability to be a star. Okay.
Yeah.
I remember screaming out in that quiet theater when he turned into the werewolves, like, call me Wolverine. And everyone applauded to me because the movie was so bad. Okay. But they showed us like a wolf is always supposed to be under the control of a vampire because they control beings of the night, right? That was the idea.
Okay,
So if you follow that, then obviously, well, there's a winner. Mental control. But the reality of it is that, I've seen Monster Squad, right? And we know that a werewolf can take like being exploded, thrown out a window or whatever, and they grow back together. A vampire has very specific things that murder it. A werewolf could literally take all the time in the world to do that to that vampire.
It depends on whether is this Van Helsing rules or Monster Squad rules.
They're all very similar, is that
Yeah.
a werewolf can only be killed by a silver bullet. So
Yeah.
why would the vampire be holding a gun
I'm
with
not
a silver
convinced.
bullet?
I'm not convinced they're not part of the same multiverse at this point.
I also like to think that both of those things are demonic influence, or devil influence upon the mortal soul of some type, right?
We could get into so much about like what causes vampirism. What is it? Curse? Is it biological? Is it supernatural? We could get into all that. We don't have time for all that.
Like I said, I've been reading those books since I was like in elementary school. So yeah.
The winner is most twisted by evil. The original Dracula wasn't even that durable, it's been extrapolated.
Yeah, neither was Wolfman. Yeah,
multiplied by many times.
And I'm a Werewolf the Apocalypse fanboy, so Krynos form werewolf is always going to tear apart a vampire that's not at least a few hundred years old.
That's true.
I do have one little bit of advice for all the listeners if you're going to play Ravenloft. Have a wizard or a bard in your party and have them know tiny hut. Thank me later.
Nothing can get you in the tiny hut.
Thank you later.
This is Jack Steelman with Roll Havoc, reminding you that your date on Friday night probably isn't a vampire, but you should order an appetizer with garlic in it just in case. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Roll Havoc.